So let's look at distinguishing between fixed and variable cost. And so basically, what we can say is there are four different types of behaviors that we actually can look at. The first one are the fixed costs. And so they tend to be unaffected by changes in the level of activity. So we have the level of activity. So let's say maybe the units that we produce, the units that we sell, and that's the x-axis, and the y-axis we have the cost item. And so basically it doesn't matter if we produce 200 or 300 units, it will always be a straight horizontal line. And so fixed does not mean that it's constant over time, because salaries, for example, could increase. So you could get a promotion, and then from one year to the next you have 2% more salary, for example. But also salary, let's say you have a 40-hour week, is a fixed component, or is a fixed cost component you have. And so basically it is a stable cost factor. Or if we look at rent, it doesn't, if we produce a product in a factory and we produce 300 or 400 units, it doesn't matter. We paid rent once for the factory, and so it stays the same. Of course, if we look at wages, it might be a bit different because there people are paid by hour of work. Basically, and I just use another example, I think I use, let's say, a bit more of a practical example here. Let's say you plan to have a cooking evening for your friends. So basically you say, well, I've got 5 or 10 friends that I always wanted to invite for dinner, so I cook for them. Then the fixed costs are, for example, your costs for the kitchen, for the, let's say, the rent for the apartment, or especially the rent for the kitchen where you produce the food. And it doesn't matter if you invite 3, 4, or 5 friends, the rent that you pay for your apartment will always stay the same. So it doesn't matter for how many friends you cook in that kitchen, the rent will always be the same. That's fixed cost, or fixed costs. Let's look at variable costs. And that is, let's say, the opposite of fixed cost. So it changes with the level of activity. So the more we produce, the more costs we have. So let's say, for example, production materials. If we produce smartphones, the more we produce, the more raw materials we need, like plastics and certain other components that we need in the phone. And so basically, the more phones we produce, the higher the variable costs will be. And so you can also see that as the raw materials you need to make your dinner, your cooking evening. The more friends you invite, the more of the ingredients you need, the more pasta you need, the more vegetables you need, the more drinks you need. And so the costs will rise in accordance with how many people you invite. So these are the main types of behaviors of costs. Let's now look at these two, but in other contexts. There are stepped fixed costs. So it's the same as fixed costs, but there is a step in them. So basically, they do not remain fixed over all levels of output, but there is a step at a certain moment in time. And these moments that we have here, these moments where the step occurs, are the step in the fixed costs. But how could that happen? It basically happens if you say, let's say we produce smartphones, and here are the first 500 units we produce. But then our factory is too small, because actually we can only produce 500 units before our machines are at their limit, or our capacity in the factory. So we have to rent another factory. And so the fixed costs go up, they step up. But then we again have capacity to produce 500 more. But then again, if we have produced 1,000, we are at the limit of our production capacity. So we need another factory, and we rent the factory and have again fixed costs. And so that means there is a certain threshold level of output. So let's say at 500 units, we cannot produce more, so we need another factory. The same also for your cooking evening. If you invite 5 friends, it might be fine because you have enough capacity in your kitchen. But if you now invite 6 friends, it might be that you don't have capacity enough, not enough space to cook for everybody. So what can you do? You can ask another friend to also prepare meals at her or his own kitchen. And then, of course, the part of the rent for the other flat or the kitchen would be relevant costs or relevant fixed costs for you. But then 5 friends, 6 friends. So another person has to cook. And so maybe then until 10 people you have capacity. Okay, so a step in the fixed cost. And then, like I said, rent is one example. Then there's also semi-fixed or semi-variable cost. And basically, there is a fixed and a variable element to both. So you have a certain fixed element, so that's why the line does not start at 0, but it already starts at a certain moment. And basically then it goes up. And so this is, for example, telephone or electricity bill. Let's say a telephone situation in which you have a certain base cost that you have to pay. So a certain basis, let's say €10 a month to use the phone or certain parts in the phone. And then with every call you make, you have more costs. But why? And you can see the costs here as the dots. And the red line is the average. But why is not every, let's say, call the same cost? What do you think? Why is not every call the same cost? It's basically because the length of the calls change. So you can call a friend for 2 minutes or for 2 hours. That might change something. And also if you call somebody abroad, you might have higher costs. So not every call, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 calls you make has the same cost. So then you take an average. And with this, we finish all the different behaviors of costs. Okay, so fixed, variable, a step fixed, and also semi-variable. If you now look at the total cost graph, I think we don't really have to dive deep into that. It basically looks at, if we know the fixed costs and the variable costs, we can create a total cost situation. So basically here are the fixed costs. There, the more we produce, we have more variable costs. So this red line here is the total cost graph that we have. Great, and that's the first thing. That's the first learning goal, fixed variable cost differentiation.